The chain on Josefina Rivera's ankle dragged across the basement floor as Gary Heidnik led her upstairs and out of the house, and for a few minutes in the cold Philadelphia night, she had to pretend she still belonged to him. She had spent months underground at 3520 North Marshall Street, watching women starve, freeze, and break under a man who treated captivity like a system he could refine. Now she was in his car, beside the same man who had kidnapped her and forced her to help him control the others. He believed she was still loyal enough to help him bring back another victim. Josefina knew this was the opening she had been waiting for, and she also knew it could vanish in a second if he sensed even a flicker of resistance. She sat still, spoke when she had to, and looked for the first place where a street, a person, or a locked door might put something between herself and the house on Marshall Street. By the time that night came in March 1987, Josefina had already survived far more than most people could imagine. Heidnik abducted her in November 1986, making her the first of 6 women he held captive in the basement over the following months. He kept them chained, assaulted them, and controlled food, movement, sleep, and contact with the outside world. 2 of the women, Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley, were killed during the captivity. 4, including Josefina, were still alive when the end finally came. The house was not a place of sudden explosions of rage alone. What made it so terrifying was the routine. Heidnik built a system of domination in which hunger, fear, punishment, and isolation did the work for him day after day, until survival depended on reading his moods, making calculations, and enduring 1 hour at a time. Josefina survived long enough to understand that staying alive required more than courage. It required strategy. At first, she had no obvious path out. Heidnik kept the women chained in the basement and moved among them with the confidence of a man who thought no one important would notice if poor black women vanished. That confidence was not irrational. The women he targeted were vulnerable, and he used that vulnerability as part of the trap. In the basement, Josefina learned quickly that panic could get a person killed. She watched the hierarchy inside the house change as Heidnik manipulated the captives against one another, rewarding compliance, punishing resistance, and trying to turn one woman into a tool against the others. Josefina began doing what survivors in closed systems often do. She studied the man holding power. She learned what he wanted to hear, what calmed him, what made him feel admired, and how much he enjoyed the illusion that he was in total control. She understood that she could not overpower him. She would have to persuade him to loosen his grip himself. That meant winning his trust without ever truly having it. Over time, Josefina convinced Heidnik that she was useful to him. She acted cooperative enough that he gave her slightly more freedom than the others. It was not freedom in any normal sense. It was the kind of small, tactical slack a captor gives, only when he thinks his victim has nowhere real to go. He began taking her upstairs. He let her help with tasks tied to the abductions. Eventually, he trusted her enough to bring her along as he searched for another woman. That was the crack in the wall she had been working toward. It did not make her safe. It made the danger sharper. If she failed, he would know exactly what she had tried to do, and the women still in the basement would pay too. But if she did nothing, the cycle would continue and somebody else would be dragged into the same house. On March 24th, 1987, Heidnik took Josefina with him to find another victim. Sources differ slightly in how they describe the final stop, but the core facts are consistent. He let her out with instructions to recruit another woman while he waited nearby, believing she would return. Instead, Josefina ran to her boyfriend's house. For a moment, even then, the danger was not over. Years inside exploitation and fear can make a person think in the old pattern for one fatal second, and Josefina later said she first wanted to go back and confront Heidnik rather than call police. Then she made the choice that saved lives. She called the police and told them what was inside the house on Marshall Street. Officers noticed marks from the chains on her body and took the story seriously enough to move fast. Heidnik was located at a gas station where he had been waiting, assuming the woman he had terrorized for months would come back to him. He was arrested before he could return to the house and erase what remained of his crimes. When police entered 3520 North Marshall Street, They found exactly the kind of scene Josefina had described. In the basement were the surviving captives, chained and alive because one woman had managed to get outside and keep moving until the right people listened. It is difficult to overstate what that took. Josefina did not escape from a passing threat or a chaotic accident. She escaped from a system built to erase resistance. She had spent months under the control of a man who used restraints, starvation, assaults, and terror to convince women they no longer had a future outside his house. By the time police reached the basement, the surviving women were not rescued because Heidnik had slipped or because chance had intervened on its own. They were rescued because Josefina had watched, adapted, earned trust she did not feel, and then used the first real opening to break the case apart from the outside. The investigation that followed laid bare how much Heidnik had done and how long he had believed he could keep doing it. He was charged with the kidnappings, assaults, and murders connected to the basement captivity. Evidence from the house, testimony from surviving victims, and the physical condition of the captives left little doubt about what officers had uncovered. Heidnik was convicted in 1988 of 2 counts of first-degree murder and multiple other offenses, and he was later executed by lethal injection in 1999. But the legal ending, important as it was not the true center of Josefina Rivera's story. The center was the moment before police ever saw the basement, the moment a woman who had every reason to fear the outside world chose it anyway, because staying meant death for herself and for others. That was what made her survival different from many other escape stories. Josefina was not simply the first one to find an unlocked door. She was the one who understood that brute force would fail, that panic would fail, and that endurance alone would not save the women still chained below the house. She had to think in the same space where Heidnik wanted everyone too terrified to think at all. She had to carry the burden of appearing obedient to a man she knew was capable of killing. She had to leave while knowing he might still catch her before police reached the basement. And after months of being told, in every possible way, that he controlled the terms of life and death, she had to act as if that control was a lie. That kind of survival was not loud. It was patient, calculated, and unbelievably dangerous. The story of Gary Heidnik's basement is often told as a catalog of horror, and the horror was real. But Josefina Rivera's place in it matters because she changed the ending. Without her, the house might have remained sealed a little longer. Another woman might have been brought inside. Another body might have vanished before anyone connected the pattern. Instead, she walked out under the eye of the man who believed he owned her future, turned his confidence against him, and led police back to the place where the others were still waiting in chains. In the clearest sense possible, she did not just survive. She interrupted a killer in the middle of continuing. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.